Matthew 18:15-35 from the Message. If a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him. Work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you've made a friend. If he won't listen, take one or two others along so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest, and try again. If he still won't listen, tell the church. If he won't listen to the church, you'll have to start over from scratch, confront him with the need for repentance, and offer again God's forgiving love. Take this most seriously. A yes on earth is a yes in heaven. A no on earth is no in heaven. What you say to one another is eternal. I mean this. When two of you get together on anything at all on earth and make a prayer of it, my Father in heaven goes into action. And when 2 or 3 of you are together because of me, you can be sure that I'll be there. At that point, Peter got up the nerve to ask, Master, how many times do I forgive a brother or sister who hurts me? 7? Jesus replied, 7? Hardly. Try 70 times 7. The kingdom of God is like a king who decided to square accounts with his servants. As he got underway, one servant was brought before him who had run up a debt of $100,000. He couldn't pay up, so the king ordered the man, along with his wife, children, and goods, to be auctioned off at the slave market. The poor wretch threw himself at the king's feet and begged, Give me a chance. I'll pay it all back. Touched by his plea, the king let him off, erasing the debt. The servant was no sooner out of the room when he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him $10. He seized him by the throat and demanded, Pay up now! The poor wretch threw himself down and begged, Give me a chance and I'll pay it all back. But he wouldn't do it. He had him arrested and put in jail until the debt was paid. When the other servants saw this going on, they were outraged and brought a detailed report to the king. The king summoned the man and said, You evil servant, I forgave your entire debt when you begged me for mercy. Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy? The king was furious and put the screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. And that's exactly what my Father in heaven is going to do to each one of you who doesn't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy.
Karen, the prelude this morning. Thank you. It was a beautiful setup for worship, a beautiful invitation into worship. And Grant, thank you. Thank you. Last month, the elders and Bob turned our attention toward the recent life of our church. And in just a few minutes, we came up with an encouraging list of positive signs of energy and strength and health in our congregation. We looked back at the 2 White Ally training groups that allowed us to engage with the broader local community last summer and fall, and our ongoing monthly conversations with English language learners, and the Friday afternoon singing group for the joy of singing together, and our retreat last fall, and our fairly recent new attendees, Bill and Barb, Zach and Terry, our Advent worship series at the end of the year that brought many additional voices into our worship services. Birthday brunches at Bob and Lauren's. Bringing the arts into worship in ever-expanding ways. The $100 project with regard to reparations. The small group gathering around a mutual interest in supporting an immigrant family. Potlucks are back. Game nights are returning to our calendar. These are good things. There's an outreach or missional influence reflected in this list. And the list also clearly indicates that we find being together to be a good and joyful and meaningful thing. There is so much here that nurtures and supports us and motivates us to be committed to this group and to the work that God is doing in and through us. Visitors often notice something about the energy here, the type of sharing and conversation that often characterizes our Sunday school discussions and our talk around the table at potluck, etc. And yet we also know that conversations can sometimes just sort of stall and leave everyone at the table unsure of the best way to proceed. Many of us experience that happening around the topic of adopting a statement about being an inclusive congregation. And I think many of us were a little surprised to find ourselves trying to figure out how best to move forward when we became kind of stuck in that conversation. And the Sunday school class that met to study and provide input for the Anabaptism at 500 Bible study process also experienced a conversation kind of like that one Sunday. We got to a place where none of us really knew how to proceed with the differences of perspectives that we were hearing from different voices at the table, particularly in response to a passage from a particular psalm. And we might remember that some of our conversations about reparations and about various initiatives that we thought we might consider engaging in as a congregation kind of just didn't really go anywhere. Like there wasn't necessarily resolution, but they just sort of kind of disappeared. And these examples primarily reflect differences of opinion or perspectives or beliefs or values. We don't seem to have quite the right tools in our toolkit to know how to move forward when these sometimes significant pauses or glitches come up. And there's also a different but related thread that runs through our shared experience, which has to do with the ways that different personalities can sometimes spark off one another, rub against each other in ways we don't especially enjoy. Communication, style differences, and cultural differences can cause that. And so can interaction expectations that were formed from patterns that we experienced in our families of origin. Many of us in the room here, though, were together through that very long and detailed process of deciding to sell the building at 9th and Clay, as well as the decision to rent this lovely space that we're in right now. And we know that we certainly have accomplished a vast number of decisions together. So we know that a lot of the time we handle decision-related interaction as well as lots of other kinds of interaction quite well indeed. But when you stop and think about it, some of us have been together for 20 or more years. And of course, the way we do things will look different to those of us who essentially built the interaction systems that now shape us and shape how we relate to one another. Then they will look to someone who's a newcomer, look or feel to someone who just walks into what's here now. Think back to the last time you met either a friend's or perhaps even way back your fiance's family for the first time, and thinking how utterly strangely they did things compared to how your family did things. Because, your family did things clearly the way God intended for families to operate, but then you meet this other family, and what's it like to try to become part of them? An interest that the elders and Bob have been considering in depth is, what resources do we need to have available to support different types of communication processes, especially the ones we see ourselves struggling with as a group? How do we ensure safe and respectful interactional spaces that allow all voices to be heard? What best supports our ability to address anything that might be holding us back as a congregation from the fullest expression of our purpose and our mission for existing? Can we be even better salt and light in our community than we have been in the past few years? It is unfortunate that the other two elders happen not to be here this morning. Andrew and Laurel are off to attend an event in Dubuque that had been scheduled for some weeks back, and it got canceled and rescheduled. And in order to make it to that, they couldn't be here and worship with us. And Christy is in Chicago. I thought that's where Christy was, right. So they are the other two elders right now, and I'm the third. So the elders are engaging these particular questions because we are charged with supporting the spiritual life of the congregation. So this interest is squarely within our bailiwick. Just a quick reference to Article 5 of our bylaws. The bylaws explain that 3 elders, all of whom are church members or covenant participants, provide support, counsel, and prayer for the pastor and her or his family, and work together to do the following in consultation with the pastor. And then there's a list of items lettered A through K. I'm only going to read the first 2, just A and B. Item A, that's the responsibility of the elders, is to assist with the spiritual development of the congregation. Item B is to help provide pastoral care to the congregation. And then on it goes down to item K. So these 2 items, spiritual development and care for the congregation, have been much on the minds and hearts of the elders recently. When we consider the Matthew 18 scripture that Grant just read for us, of people working out their differences first between themselves, we also see that later on the church also potentially has a role in supporting people here. And some people might need support even with the very first recommendation, which is to go at it solo. Not everybody finds that particularly easy to do. Matthew's clear about the role of the church in the subsequent steps. There's a point at which differences and conflicts do become the work of the church. In our church structure, the elders are the logical group to hold much or most of this responsibility, at least initially. We are the group to which people are most likely to turn for support in that Matthew 18 process. But oddly, the elders per se have no particular training to do this, no particular process or structure or outline to consult or follow. Our elders never have had, as far as we know. Christy and Andrew and I all happened to serve together as elders 10 years ago, and 10 years ago we didn't have anything like this to follow. How many of you have served as an elder at some time or another? Okay, 3 more, and I know Ellen has, and who else has gone this morning? Anyway, a number of people have, and a number of people rotate through that. Do you know of any such guidelines, guidance, help for the elders to work through? No. So when it comes to coming alongside people who are experiencing some sort of difficulty with something that's up in the congregation, we find ourselves in a position or wishing we had something better to offer. Now, of course, our current configuration of elders does happen to include a highly qualified psychologist with strong expertise that is immensely helpful, but Christy is not a lifelong member of the elders team. And B, Christy and Paul both are here to worship with us and grow with us much more than to bring their work into their weekends or into their church life, their worship life. In the past year, the elders have reached out to a resource at the conference level to provide a perspective and a skill set that we don't yet have within our congregation. Central Plains has a conflict management support team that operates within the conference to help congregations, pastors, and conference leaders manage conflict in ways that lead toward reconciliation and forgiveness. Their purpose is to instruct, model, and lead constructive methods of conflict management that are consistent with our Mennonite or Anabaptist faith. Tim Detweiler, who formerly held the position that Susan Jansen now holds as conference minister for ministerial leadership, observes that although our Anabaptist and Mennonite peace theology often leads us to view conflict as a bad thing to be avoided, if at all possible, Jesus actually calls us to manage conflict rather than avoid it. It does, after all, show up as a natural part of all human relationships, even within the church. So, where's this coming from? Sounds like it's out of left field. What conflict? I don't know about any conflict. Do you know about any conflict? Conflict may seem like too strong a word for some of you. So for starters, think of it as a process of skill building and perspective taking that better equips us to make our way through difficult conversations like what a statement regarding inclusivity might look like for us, or the other examples that I mentioned early on. Not only do the elders need training, but the congregation could benefit from it as well, not only because different people rotate into and out of service as elders, but also because we all are counseled in the Matthew 18 passage to deal with things when they show up rather than waiting for them to blow up. And trying to sweep stuff under the rug, under the bed, into the closet, well, you know how effective a strategy that is, right? So a bit of training would also allow us to live into our covenant more fully. Very germane to our worship today is the fact that one or more of us might in fact feel much better prepared to sign the covenant and to take communion if we were able to find effective ways to engage in a difficult conversation or two prior to participating in these processes, either annually in the case of the covenant or multiple times a year in the case of communion. I imagine that you all received an electronic copy of the covenant with the email that Bob sent out Thursday morning. Did you notice that was in your email inbox? 6 understandings follow the affirmations of faith that we looked at last week when Bob preached on 1 John chapter 4. The affirmations are considered unchanging, although our understandings of them may shift over time. The first 3 understandings in that last section of the covenant, down here at the bottom of the document. The first 3 understandings each imply expectations for how we relate to one another. The first one says, we commit ourselves to active participation in worship services and small group activities. Close personal relationships with believers are essential to the Christian life. The second one says we see ourselves as mutually accountable to both give and receive counsel in the body of believers. And Matthew 18, 15 through 20 is referenced there, and that's the first half of what Grant read for us this morning. And the third understanding says we reject violence as a means for resolving conflict and commit ourselves to be peacemakers in the world. Last year, as we were preparing to sign our covenant, I brought in a reminder from Dave Boschert, who I think had been the director of Central Plains Conference. I don't remember exactly what his title was, but a lot of you have met him. And he made this point in a Scattered Seeds article about 10 years ago, that covenant relationships trust the best intentions of those with whom we covenant. When we fail to live up to our best intentions, we extend to one another the same grace that God extends to us. In other words, we have one another's back as we work out how best to walk together in faith and practice as a covenanting community. So during our worship this morning, we have before us the practices of covenant signing and communion, and now the topic of conflict in the context of being curious about anything that might be holding us back as a congregation from the fullest expression of our purpose and our mission for existing. Again, those related questions the elders have been investigating include: what resources do we need to have available to support different types of communication processes, especially the ones we see ourselves struggling with? How do we ensure safe and respectful interactional spaces that allow all voices to be heard? And can we be even better salt and light in our community than we have been in the past few years? So in this broad context, here now is an invitation from the elders to the entire congregation. I wish the other two elders were here this morning. The elders of Cedar Falls Mennonite Church desire to help support communication processes throughout the church that ensure the inclusion of all voices within the congregation while moving forward in response to God's call for life together as the body of Christ. At this time in the life of the church, a facilitated process for creating strong, healthy communication patterns looks like an important way to strengthen church relationships and build up capacity for healthy practices for moving forward together. In service to that goal, Lon Marshall and Ted Lewis of the Central Plains Conflict Management Support Team are available to support a facilitated process for both leadership and other church participants. One component of that facilitated process would be an open invitation to anyone in the church who feels called or drawn to be part of learning, healing, resolving conversations in the coming weeks. Interested individuals would be invited to participate in listening and preparatory Zoom meetings with Lon and Ted during the first 2 weeks of May, followed by in-person meetings during the third week of May. You could choose to meet with Lon and Ted alone, or in pairs, or triads, electing whatever option allows you to feel most supported. The eventual goal of these preparatory conversations would be participation in a larger facilitated group conversation that is scheduled to take place on the afternoon of Saturday, May 20th, designed not to solve everything, but rather to lay a foundation for people's experiences to be validated, to begin rebuilding some relative trust where it's needed, and to mutually agree on some next steps as the church considers ways to move forward and strengthen our communication practices and processes and patterns. Conference Minister Nathan Luchins is available to support this process, to attend the group meeting on May 20th, and to make recommendations for practical steps the church may choose to take following the meeting. Now, Bob will email out this invitation sometime early this week, so that everybody who's here or not here has that and can read through that, think about that, and see what questions come up. And you're welcome to address questions to Bob or to me, also to Andrew or Christy, since they work full-time and I don't. I might be a little more available than they are, but they certainly are also available to address questions. So as you wonder about this, and as you consider whether you might be interested in or you might benefit from participating in this facilitated process with Lon and Ted, I encourage you to tune into your own inner guidance system, or your own inner knowing, as Glennon Doyle refers to it, wherever it is that you go internally when you're contemplating something meaningful. What things, if any, do you notice about communication here at church and wish were different? What things, if any, do you carry that relate to interactions perhaps long past, things that you told yourself weren't all that important, but which have a way of coming up again and again for you because they never really were quite resolved? There's a lot of research pretty widely available now that indicates that the things we don't deal with when they initially happen have ways of hanging around in our bodies for a really long time. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, comes to mind, as does My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem, and there are others, lots of other resources as well on that topic. Lon and Ted will be good resources for us during the month of May for at least beginning to find our way toward resolution and healing where it might be needed and appropriate. For some of you, I have a feeling that this very topic comes right out of the blue, possibly, without any sense of what might be motivating this at this time. That's partly because things that the elders hear in confidence are held in confidence, and the elders are aware of some things that have been difficult for some folks to deal with in recent months. It's appropriate that they haven't been shared widely, but there are some things, and a little bit more about that will be shared sometime in the next week or two, briefly. But if you're wondering why this and why now, and why perhaps it's something you're not at all familiar with or tuned into, that's what I'll say about that. Sometimes, even, throughout my life in church, not just this church, any church, every church, sometimes I'll find myself singing hymns on Sunday morning, and there's so many of them about love. An awful lot of them are about love and loving one another, which is appropriate. And I'll think, I do love the people I worship with, but man, there's this thing that just pokes at me so often, and I wish I had it within me to bring that up and talk with that person about it, and it's just so hard for me to do that. And so I'll be singing about the love around us in the congregation, think, yeah, absolutely. But gee, I'm no good at this thing that Matthew 18 says to do. Go speak with this person if there's something between you. It's not in my personality to just jump right in and go do that. And so sometimes I feel the twinge. I feel an inconsistency sometimes, and like I said, have done for years. This church, other churches, because I am so incredibly conflict avoidant personally, and I understand that the Bible talks about accountability, and it talks about not just sweeping things under the rug. I get that. It just doesn't come naturally to me. We are about to move into the covenant signing process and passing the peace with one another. And I want to echo something that Bob said in his welcome to us this morning, which is that none of us is ever under any pressure to sign the covenant in a given year or on a given date. It can be signed anytime through the year. None of us is ever under any pressure to participate in communion if the time is not right for us. There's no judgment here around either of those practices. Your choices are always between you and your God. Right now, whenever you are ready, please make your way over to the table over here if you do want to sign the covenant now for this year. And also, while you're up, greet one another with the love of Christ this morning. Thank you.